All right, let's discuss all of these developments and what the next moves may be for the U.S. with our panel. Joining us now is retired Marine Corps Intelligence Officer Hal Kampfer and Emanuele Ottolenghi, a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Emanuele, I'd like to start with you because we know that tensions in Venezuela have been escalating for a while now. Guaido declared himself interim president back in January. The situation has been very much on edge. This morning, he released that video saying that he had the support of what he called the brave soldiers in Caracas, and he called on the people to come out to the streets to protest. Why do you think Guaido decided to up the ante now?
We can speculate, but I think two reasons. First, the more obvious one, and that is that the 4 months since Guaido took the presidency and initiated the process of a peaceful transition according to the Venezuelan constitution have yielded very little result because the illegitimate Maduro regime controls, all the tools of power, including, he has still the loyalty mostly of the army. That's the most obvious reasons. Therefore, there was a need for a change of speed and tactic in order to force the issue. The second is speculation, although it's been widely reported throughout the day. It's likely that the Maduro regime was going to move to limit the freedom of Guaido, potentially arrest him, and so there was a need to change the dynamic of this clash between Guaido and the Maduro regime.
And Hal, we're hearing something quite different from U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He's been saying in interviews that Maduro was actually prepared to flee today until Moscow intervened and told him to not do it, to stay put. What do you make of that, Hal?
Michelle, there's a lot that happens behind the scenes. I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Michelle, there's a lot that happens behind the scenes. There's obviously communications that are more official that are going to the Venezuelan government and stuff that's coming to the Venezuelan government. And I think at some point he had determined that it was time to get out of there. Things were not going well. I think there's a lot more military support across the board for the coup, certainly than the top leadership of the military wants to admit. This is a significant change. They've managed to somehow keep a clamp on the military, and now you're seeing soldiers standing up there, literally standing on the camera with Guaido in the background of Guaido as he's making this announcement. So there's a lot going on. I think Maduro looked at this and said, it's time to get out of here, and the Russians bolstered him, but I would look very closely at what the Cubans are doing. I don't think that reference to Cuban military operations was just an idle reference point. I think there's specific things that we may have picked up on the ground. The Russians working in concert with the Cubans in Latin American countries to bolster leftist dictators is not something new. And so I think there's a confluence of things going on here. But I think the Russians kind of bolstered up Maduro and said, you stay there and we're going to keep you in power. And that's probably why he changed his mind.
Emanuele, Hal used the term coup there. The use of that term by some has generated a lot of controversy. Some, including U.S. Senator Marco Rubio, were saying that this is not a coup, that this is a legitimate constitutional move and that it should be seen as such, that it's the government of Maduro that's illegitimate and supported by Cuba, as Hal says. So talk us through all of these external players here, because you've got a lot of other people with stake in the game, with skin in the game, rather. You've got the Russians, you've got Cuba, you've got China, you've also have Iran and Hezbollah. It's a very complex situation with all of these other actors, isn't it?
It is indeed. The Russians and the Chinese have hugely invested financially to keep Maduro in power because both for commercial reasons and for geopolitical reasons, Venezuela has been an asset for them. For the Russians in particular, it's been something that gives them, leverage to interfere with U.S. interests in the Western Hemisphere. But of course, there are other powers, as you mentioned, Hezbollah and Iran have made Venezuela their forward operating base in the region. Hezbollah has used Venezuela, among other countries in the region, to launder drug money and finance its budget for years. There is a huge presence of Venezuelan, of Lebanese and Iranian regime operatives in Venezuela, or enjoying the asset of a Venezuelan citizenship to operate with impunity and under the radar across Latin America. So for them is extremely important. But I think that, again, the point made by the president today about Cuba is the most crucial one. The Cubans have thousands of counterintelligence and military officials infiltrated in the Venezuelan military. They're the ones that are keeping Maduro in power and keeping the army in line. And I think that the president's threat to make a move against Cuba and tighten the sanctions regime against the island as retaliation for their support of the Maduro regime is definitely possibly a game changer and the way forward.
Hal, very quickly, if there is military intervention from the U.S., what would that look like?
Well, it could be a number of things. My first thought would be we might do something very targeted and specific in terms of airstrikes, and that would be working in concert in some way with Guaido's forces on the ground. And that's what I would see. I mean, it's possible special operations, and you could certainly see a Marine Expeditionary Unit, possibly. That would be a lot of stuff on the ground, and there'd have to be a lot of coordination going on. So I think something more limited, and it could be a show of force operations. That would be the first thing that I would expect them to do.
All right. Thank you so much, Hal Kamfa and Emanuele Ottolenghi.